This semester we take up a topic which is related and expands upon what we did last semester. Our theme this semester is what it is that unites, what idea animates, what gives real substance and unity to private law. And the answer that we'll see it's given by our author, Friedrich Stahl, in his book, The Doctrine of Law and State, which I see all of you have gained. You've all got your book. Very good. The answer that he gives is that it's a twofold principle. Our imaging God in the created world. And we can go wrong if we're trying to understand what private law, that means things you're very familiar with, the rights of legal agency, the fact that I'm a rights bearer in the eyes of the law, that I have a right to physical integrity, to freedom of motion, that I can form rights in things, property, that I can form rights in people's obligations, contracts, the fact that I have rights that arise when you wrongfully injure me, the fact that I can marry and have proper relations with my children. All of these aspects which go under private law, Stahl wants to give us a single idea of them. And it's twofold. It comes together where two major principles cross right at the center of them. And it can't be understood without either one of them. One is that we have material needs. And that the other is we are not just material. We are made in the image of God. At the bottom corner of this, we see what happens. This is William Blake's illustration of Nebuchadnezzar reduced to a beast. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar looked upon his kingdom, looked upon the world and said, I've made this. I've done this. I have enough. I have material things. I have enough. I have done this through my power. I am autonomous. And in that very moment, he became like an animal. He was cursed to show outwardly what he had become inwardly, which was by denying that God had done these things for him, denying what God had done and God had directed him to do. He became like an animal. And Stahl's point is, if we try to give a completely material aim to private law, which is easy to do, private law seems to be about things that we can add up and count. We can study through a scientific lens. Whatever makes the most money, that's the best kind of private law. Whatever satisfies our material needs, whatever we do to do that, that's what private law should be. He says that cannot account, even begin to account, for the basic structures of private law. And he opposes to that not an idea of law which ignores our real needs, but an idea of private law that simply shows in an explanatory fashion how the best way to account for property and contract and the law of family is to understand it at the intersection of our physical needs with our potential to be drawn towards God. The fact that we are made in the image of God and that the full range of our capacities, the full range of our needs is not just to eat, not just to drink, not just to have physical security, but to do so in a way that acknowledges what none of us can deny, is that we are free beings. We're responsible beings. We're acting beings. We're beings that are made in God's image. And the nature of our desire for physical things can never be reduced to physical things. If we gain all the food in the world, but we have it like a pig at a trough, we don't begin to satisfy our real needs. So the aim of this semester is for us to capture that conception of private law. It's not unrelated to what we were doing last semester. My problem with the clicker is not unrelated to last semester. I may need manual clicker assistance. There we go. Remember, last semester we surveyed the idea of praise in relationship to law. We looked at the structure of praise as a way of structuring our relationship and understanding of law. If everything is something that we should give praise to God for. If we want to glorify God in eating and drinking and in lawyering, how should we understand law? How should we understand it as a work of God? How should we understand our dependence on God and recipients of God's grace in the way that we approach law? And we saw that its method of approaching law is very different than mere scientific analysis of law. We use the example of a wedding. If you go to a wedding and you just describe the body mass and the height and compare the bride and the groom in their weight, and you say their average good looks, one of you is a little overweight, one of you is a little underweight, you're liable to have 1.3 children, why, that's not a very good way of praising the wedding couple. That there's another mode of approaching the world that involves opening up the world in its goodness in a way that's especially important for us as Christians, because we know God as a great source of goodness and graciousness. And so we need to be able not merely to analyze the world, but to praise the world, to give thanks to God for the things in this world. And we want to do that, one, because we have a duty to God. God says, you ought to praise me. And God isn't selfish in that way. He's not mean-spirited like a man who wants praise. It's a great source of joy for us to experience the world as something which is a gracious gift from God. And Stahl is going to help us do that. You might think, although the work that we're going to have is very analytical, it is all about opening up the very structure of private law so that we can understand how all of it is a part of the way that God has wonderfully made us, wonderfully made the world, wonderfully arranged history, so that the basic legal structures by which we live are not inert, dead, calculating things, but property law, contract law, the law of family, the law of my personal rights are structured to draw me up to God. They're only intelligible if I think upon them in terms of connecting myself back to God in gratitude. So Stahl is going to provide us with a lot of terms. You remember last semester when we studied about praise, we saw that there are four modes of praise. Elevation, to think about something in its relationship to God. Also reasoning, to understand the goodness of something in terms of its consequences, so that we can understand it in terms of its goodness as a gift from God. Comparison, showing how what God has given us and asked us to do is better than the alternatives. And accumulation, by which we pile all these on in an emotionally powerful way. Well, Stahl is really good at helping us with the first three, but he's not very good at that powerful emotional appeal. His work is demanding and it's technical, and we'll do all that we can together to try to make it as clear as possible, but he's attempting a really difficult thing. I mean, he wants to take your entire first year of law school and explain how it is not just a matter of policies that seek to maximize GDP. It's not just things that we all want in our self-interest. Law is not just a kind of compromise pact between smart animals by which we agree not to kill each other for our mutual individual interest. It's something much, much more. And Stahl is he's a really great, somewhat tragic figure. He was born into a Jewish family, and he became a Christian when he was 17 years old, Lutheran Christian in Germany. And he lived in a really difficult time. If sometimes it feels like we live in a difficult time, he lived in a much more difficult time. His country had recently been conquered by the first really militant expression of revolutionary impulses, which we were struggling with all the way up through the 20th century. Germany had been conquered by Napoleon, who, like many people who want to expand democracy and freedom, think that the best way to do it is by invading other countries. And Napoleon did just that. Napoleon wanted to carry the principles of the French Revolution, its individualism, its literal enshrinement of reason as a god to be worshipped, its sweeping away of all past patterns of life. He wanted to carry that into all the countries around. He invaded Spain, he invaded Italy, he invaded Germany. Of course, he went a little too far. He invaded Russia, which didn't work out so well for him, and it was his undoing. But this was their immediate experience. And in Germany at the time of his own life, you were having the buds of communism, kind of proto-communism that was forming. Marx was one of his contemporaries. Marxism wasn't the big deal, but the idea of a radical abolition of property, a really sweeping change to extinguish private law as it was known up to that point in time, to get rid of contract and markets. All of that was very much in the air. So on the one hand, he's facing that. And on the other hand, and this is actually in his lifetime, he spent most of his time struggling against, Germany, it was viewed at the time, had been conquered by the French because it was not unified. Germany was divided between Austria and Germany. You had the Holy Roman Empire. The provinces of Germany were very small. And one very popular, and I think not wholly unreasonable view, was that Germany had been conquered by France because it was not sufficiently unified. And so there was a great sweeping movement going through Germany. And in its way, it was like a mirror of the other revolutionary movements. In the name of the state, in the name of strengthening the state, in the name of coming up with arrangements that were very hard-headed in the sense of, we don't care about your religious distinctions, we don't care about your old traditions, we don't care about your ancient territorial rights. We must, as an imperative of development, we must reconfigure the country so that it develops faster. Development, just like we talk about it today, was the name of the game in Germany at the time. They wanted economic development above all else. And at this point in time, very much like the changes that China went through recently, Germany was going through those same changes, adopting the Industrial Revolution, sweeping aside all the old constitutions and barriers. And so Stahl found himself, on the one hand, wanting to oppose those revolutionaries, the proto-communists, and on the other hand, wanting to oppose those statists, who, like our modern neoliberals, want a state that really treats the people as a kind of technology. They want to apply government as a technology to increase certain outputs, increase certain outcomes. And they want to sweep away everything, any kind of viewing of the state or people that doesn't fit that kind of almost technological analysis of what society is like. Stahl found himself in the middle of this, wanting to say no to the revolutionaries who, in the name of human freedom and human individuality, provided very good arguments against statism in one sense, but also no to the statists. And so the net result of it was this work, or this is a part of a great 3-volume work that he wrote, which encompassed the history of law and legal philosophy, which encompassed all the substantial categories of law and included constitutional law, public law, in one great work, animated by his conviction that it was only someone who understood the relationship between God and the law who could hold the center between these two forces. And so he became very famous, a wonderful and great scholar. He was a great scholar in a great age of 19th century German culture, the Germany of Goethe, the Germany of Kant, also the Germany of Marx. He was in the Germany of Beethoven. He was in an amazing age. And it's really partially just prejudice against his view. which is that without reference to God, we can't hold the center, that keeps him from being remembered alongside Kant and Hegel and Schelling and his contemporaries as one of the great thinkers of that wonderful period in the 19th century. So Stahl wants to provide us with this unified account of the central topics of private law, also the central topics of justice. And he wants to do this in a way that's particularly well suited for the approach to law that we established last semester. We want to understand law as something that we can give God praise for. We want to understand for the purposes of our own joy and because of our duty to God and our faith that God is in control of history and that God has laid down the principles of justice. We want to understand all of that material you did in the first year, which is so bewilderingly varied, so complex. It has so many distinctions that can be multiplied in so many ways. We want to understand it in a united way so that in a single impulse of our heart, we can lift it all up to God and give him thanks and praise for it. And again, his method is well suited for this because he wants to acknowledge that law is good for us. The private law is the means by which we satisfy basic material needs, need for food, need to interrelate with other people, need to marry and to have children. He doesn't want to deny that. He wants to be able to look at the Marxists and say, yes, I too am concerned about properly ordering society so that people's basic needs are taken into account. But he was very prescient in predicting that if you made these things your goal in a naked way, that you would sweep away all human dignity, that you would in the name of freedom bring about an animal-like slavery for people. As you focus them on their material ends just like animals, you would bring about a material slavery for people and a destruction of people that had never ever been heralded before. He was thinking predominantly of the effects of the Revolution and Napoleon. But now when we read him, of course, we can think of the horrible atrocities that occurred during the age of communism in the 20th century. But learning this united vision of private law, summarizing it all, and it will be my burden over the course of the semester to convince you that his account is a good and persuasive account of all these myriad elements. You're going to have to take me on trust a little bit today. But I want you to understand the purpose of this. The purpose of having this all together is so that you can think about law. You can think about what you're doing in law and really give God sincere and comprehending praise for the elements of law that you work with. Okay. So in your reading for today, just the first 2 pages of the work, he begins with a distinction between private law and public law. And so public law, he says, is about the rule by which men come together in commonality. Its concern is with the principle of authority and with the principle of rule, by which men come together in general existence. But private law has a different purpose. Private law deals with the relations between people in which the life of particular persons, and he thinks corporate persons can be involved in this as well, but particular, not the mass of men considered as a state. The life of particular persons is fulfilled. And by that he means 3 main categories. You need to protect the person in his body, the person in his physical integrity and his physical freedom to move, to speak, to worship. Also his free action with respect to the material things of this world and to the services of people. That's property and contract and tort. And finally, the carrying on of the race, the carrying on of humanity by means of marriage and family life together. Those are the subjects of private law. And here's Stahl's problem. There are a lot of ways of doing that. And there were a lot of radical proposals on the table at that time. You had the proposals of the more radical elements of the French Revolution that said, look, we need to completely scrap everything we've done. We need to reorganize everything in accordance with the strict principles of reason. We need to do away with all inequality in property. We need to do away with all distinctions between people. The most radical, I mean, there's nothing in radical feminism today that was more radical than the things that they were talking about then. All distinctions between people, all aspects of social intervention with respect to family life or sexual morality, everything needed to be swept away into an entire new remaking of man in the image of freedom. And on the other side, you had reactionaries who were saying, look at where that got us. That got us Napoleon, that got us the terror in the revolution, that led to social chaos, the collapse of economies. We need hard-headed, empirical economists running these countries. We need to forget about people's traditions. We need to force people together into manageable states whose identity is defined by geography and the dictates of an effective war and economic machine. He was in a great age, the great age of historical study, the first really scientific age of historical study. And so in addition to that, he was facing a school in Germany that said, look, you can basically find anybody doing anything at some point in history. Everything's on the table. And so he wants to find a way of understanding all these things that holds together, that has an objective meaning against all these rival political proposals and against all the possibilities that history shows us. He also had a personal problem, and it's a personal problem that he shares with us. Stahl was a great jurist. He later became a politician and stopped a lot of his academic activities. He was a great parliamentarian, attained to high office in Germany. He was also an ecclesiastical jurist, very involved in fights about the relation between church and state. But he had a personal problem, which is he spent a lot of time working on legal issues. He spent a lot of time in the details of private law. And this is a problem we face too. You, me, lots of lawyers, we spend the bulk of our time dealing with issues of property, drafting contracts carefully, dealing with issues of not yet, come back. No, the other way. This is why I should do the clicker. There we go. Thank you, though. We spend a lot of time doing that. And we have a problem. What are we doing? What kinds of relations are we nurturing through private law? What's the thing that we're doing? Are we just helping people get richer? Are we just helping people to satisfy a particular goal, and we know nothing about the overall character and meaning of the system that we are participating in? If as private lawyers, we're spending huge, vast chunks of our life working on these issues, what does it mean? Because you talk to a lot of clients, they're not thinking about God. They're not thinking about love. They're not conscious of these things in their motivations and actions. What does it mean to spend 10 hours drafting a contract, reviewing a contract after contract all day in an office, conveying real estate, or advising commercial negotiations? What is the meaning of a life that is spent doing these kinds of things? Is it reducible to the ends of your clients? Is it something that we say, well, what I'm doing when I help someone draft a contract can be reduced to their purposes and the outcomes that they obtain? If that's true, then we may be very happy if we have the right clients, or we may be unhappy Or we may be uncertain if we don't know what the ends of our clients are. But we as professionals, lawyers have long said we're not just people who do something for hire. Our motivations are not the pay that we receive. We believe that the system of private law, of law itself, involves something higher. And that's what Stahl wants to point out, that law is not just a means that men use to get their material goods. It's rather part of an entire system whose meaning, clearly, he says, forces anyone who spends any time to it to look upon themselves as beings with responsibility and purpose and freedom in a way that draws them towards God. That may not be the first thing that they think of, but that is the true character and meaning of the system for anyone who will open their eyes. You can suppress it, like we were talking about on Tuesday. You can suppress that truth, but just like the law of Moses, it is pointing us towards God. That's the claim that he makes. If it's true, well, that should really change the way you view how you spend your time working on private law. Now, his view is really controversial today. There are a lot of people in the world today who want to analyze private law as a kind of technical problem. You identify a goal. You say, well, the goal of private law is to increase economic efficiency. It's the law and economics school in the United States. Or the goal of private law is to lead to certain kinds of social conditions, sociological school of jurisprudence. Just basically today, a lot of people think about public order and law. It's a policy tool that we use to herd people into things that will make the economy grow faster. The rules by which human beings interrelate economically are not purposive. That is to say, you don't need to morally educate the people. You just need to create incentives and disincentives, economic incentives and disincentives that will encourage the most efficient kinds of behavior and discourage everything else. That's one school of thought today. We can't accept that. There's another school of thought today that says, no, look, all of law is just a lie. It all just hides power relations. It's always just a way that the powerful maintain their oppressive strangle on everyone else. There can be no real honest meaning in the law because it's a work of power. It's a work of regulation. It's opposed to unlimited human freedom and anything that structures human existence. Anything that gives it identity, anything that gives it structure is just a lie that we should tear apart. We're in the same space in a way that Stahl was in. We're between the hammer and the anvil. We're in the same space where we have two very loud, powerful forces. It's where Christians are a lot. We're caught in the center between two people who both have good ideas. They hold them with admirable intensity, but they're each missing something critical. And that's Stahl's point. Stahl's point is private law has a real meaning. It's where material need and human dignity, human freedom come together. So here's the basic argument that Stahl has. Stahl argues in opposition to either of these sides that private law consists of necessary forms. They're not arbitrary. They're necessary. And they are necessary because if you both want people to satisfy their material needs, and at the same time, you want people to understand themselves. You want people to be taught, educated. You want to reinforce their real self-knowledge that they are bearers of a divine image, that they have responsibility, that they have real ability for creative action, that they have real ability to form relations beyond lust, beyond greed, They are dictated by this. The goal of private law, the reason why you need property, contract, family law, he says, and again, we're going to have to unpack this a lot, but I'm just giving you an idea here. The reason you need these things is these forms are necessary if you want to do both of those things. So you absolutely have to have, if you want to have your nation go on, people have to have babies, they have to have children. And he says, think about it. You could have a law basically that just bred people like animals. You could have breeding programs for people. You could encourage them in their lusts. You could figure out ways of encouraging lots of children to be born. But that would make beasts of people. There really is a unique point in our family law. There's a unique point where we say, no, men and women come together for life. They come together for the purposes of mutual fidelity, of mutual support, and for having children. And that's the unique sweet spot where you both have what we need, which is children being born, and you don't have the bestialization of people. You don't reduce people like Nebuchadnezzar. You dignify them. You make them realize that they are actually capable of suppressing their appetites, that they have higher things than their sexual desires, that there is something greater than the union of bodies. There's the union of souls, and that people are capable of doing that. Similarly, you don't just want people fed. You want people fed really badly. But you don't want to lay the food out for them as you would a pig in a trough. You have to find a way of getting people fed so that the food that they receive is combined with their own action and their own responsibility. To elevate man in a way that is consistent with his humanity, while still recognizing his material needs, that uniquely determines certain aspects of the institutions of private property. So how should we understand private law if that's what we want to do? We find private law in all these different shapes. We find different aspects of it, property, contract, family law. How do we understand them under one concept? And so he says in our reading today, the principle through which the series of these relations, everything you studied in your first year, appear as a unity, as a system. Therefore, if you want to conceive of your entire first year in terms which enable you to instantly give praise to God for it, how should you understand it? Well, he says, because private law comprises the relations in which the life of individual persons is fulfilled, the principle through which this whole series of relations appears as a unity, as a system, therefore is the concept of man itself, as a personality and as built up from the natural creation. Private law, contracts, property, torts, family law, all of these things, they're about man. They are an anthropology. They are a study of man. They are a correct study of man, he thinks, in that they see man within natural creation. They see him within creation as someone who needs to eat, as someone who needs to work, as someone who needs freedom, as someone who needs to marry. But they don't see him in that way animalistically. Animals need all those things. Animals procreate, animals eat, animals like to run around. There must be something more. And against the scientistic view of things, which wants to say, really, man and animal were on one surface. We're just the same principles of biology and animal behavior that we use to manage animals in an animal farm, we can use to manage man in society. He says, no. We can acknowledge our materiality, but we also have to acknowledge our personality. And the inner testimony of your heart is the secure foundation of that. You are truly incapable of viewing yourself simply as an animal. You know you're not. You are incapable when you do something shameful of saying, well, I'm an animal. What do you expect? You're incapable of doing that. You're incapable when you show disrespect before something which deserves honor, like another person. You're incapable of saying, well, I'm an animal. Of course, I just take what I need. You're incapable of doing that. The philosophies, the revolutionary philosophies and the technological philosophies of man, he says, are both wrong because they completely ignore what we all know, which is although man is here, man is in creation, he is different than the rest of creation. He's one who can image God within creation. So private law is organized by this crossing of material needs and spiritual capacities. It's understood and structured, yes, in terms of getting man what he needs materially. That's its objective purpose. But it's not just that. You can only give man what he needs materially in a way that recognizes his freedom, his responsibility, his transcendent capacity, his capacity which goes beyond. That is to say, recognizes he's a person. So this is how he puts it. Accordingly, relations on the one hand, they're objective. They are grounded in the nature of things. They are subject to the conditions of natural material existence and in accordance with their inherent providential goals. You need to protect your body, integrity of existence. You can't run around killing people. You can't run around committing torts against people. Maintenance of life. You need to own things. You need food to put in your mouth. You need clothes to put on your body. You need houses to live in. You need tools for your job. People. You need to be able to relate to people paradigmatically in marriage, paradigmatically in family. So that's the one hand. He acknowledges that. But he says the economists, those who want to reduce managing man to a kind of animal science, they're wrong too, because that's not all there is. Next slide. Because there's another hand. On the other hand, these relations must be elevated into the essence of personality. Man is not essentially defined, as Marx would say, by his material existence. You know this. We all know this. We like to push it aside because sometimes we love to give our greed and our lust free rein. But we all know this. That's why we immediately feel shame. Our conscience reproaches us when we do these kinds of things. Man needs to be kept healthy. He needs to be kept fed. He needs to be clothed. He needs to breed. These are all naturally necessary functions. But man can only fulfill them in a way that acknowledges what he believes about himself, what he knows about himself in certain ways. Ways which acknowledge his responsibility. So like contract. We have contract to acknowledge that I have real control of my will and my words. When I say something to you, when I induce you to follow along with me, when I obligate myself, and then I pretend like I have no responsibility or capacity to hold truth to the original intent that I had, I'm denying something critical about what I am. If I lust after a woman and I say, hey, let's get married, and then afterwards I say, hey, I want a divorce. I can't control myself. Now I like this other woman. I'm denying something fundamental about my ability to form relations with other people. And so private law arises not to deny that we have material needs, but to acknowledge it and to say, you do have material needs, but you can realize them in a way that is compatible with a recognition of the basics of being made in the image of God. So the basic challenge to all of this is the technologists, the people who want to approach mankind as an economic problem or as a sociological problem, they keep saying, hey, we don't need to think about man transcendently. We don't need to talk to man as a personality. We don't need to think through these problems in terms of justice and morals. We don't need to think through these things in terms of man's higher nature. we can solve all of these things without that. And I think that's just plainly false. If you read Hayek or you read the history of social planning and all of its many disasters, I think that's enough to see that that's not true. This ability to manage things. The economists can't predict the devastating crashes that come. They argue among themselves. It doesn't work. But even if you thought it did work, if you thought, hey, I don't know, I'm not so sure, as Christians, we can't believe that. As Christians, God has said to you, that's not true. And that's what Stahl says too. Stahl says really, the final ground of a private law system as opposed to just a technological management of man as an animal or just unleashing man freely to be anarchic. The only real justification of this is the belief that man is made in the image of God. Being a person means that we are original, we are independent, we are each an absolute end of creation, part of God's world plan. We as Christians come and we say to the governors, we say to our fellow men, we need legal systems that do not reduce us to animals. We need legal systems that view each of us, that find a way of dealing with each of us as real ends of all of creation, as real goals in themselves. And Stahl says, quite rightly, that's because we believe that you and you and you and you and me, we're all made in the image of God. You know this from Genesis. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Let us differentiate man from all the other animals in the world. Let man rule over them and care for them. And so God did create man in his image. He created man and woman in that image. But I really believe too, in addition to the revelation in Genesis, I believe God has stamped this on your heart. Proverbs put it, he's put eternity on your heart. But I really like this passage from Psalm 139 to give you a sense for meditation, so that you realize this sense of personality that Stahl wants to vindicate. Here the psalmist cries out to God, "You created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And I praise you because I am fearfully, I am wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well because I'm one of them. I see what I am. I don't see it in the dirt. I don't see it in the rocks. I don't see it in the mountains. I don't even see it in the heavens. I see freedom. I see responsibility. I see the ability to act. I see the ability to imitate the creative works of God. I see the ability to form relationship and love. I see the hope of eternity on my heart. I see something radically different than everything else in the world. I am seen by God. I'm cared for by God. I am knit together by God. I am woven together. And all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. That is to say, I was made for a purpose. And you owe me respect for that purpose. Not because I'm great, but because God made me for a purpose. You owe me a duty, for God's sake, to respect that purpose within me. Really basic things. To marry, to raise children, to eat, to enjoy the bountifulness of earth, to live. You owe me that. Because God didn't make me accidentally. And I owe you that. And I know that. Because I know what I am, and I know what you are as well. And it just leads us back again to joy and praise of God. How precious to me are your thoughts, the thoughts that planned my life and made me. And how vast is the sum of them. The Bible has a lot of passages like this that deal with the problem of our age, where science is increasingly saying you're just one with nature. The Newtonian physics that determine the movement of the planets, or the quantum mechanics that determine relativistic physics, all of them just determine you as well. You're not distinct. Your consciousness is an illusion. And the scriptures had this sense as well, that there is a vast contrast between our internal experience of ourselves and the rest of nature. I just really like this passage from Zechariah. God introduces himself. This is my word, the word of the Lord. And he does two things, God. He stretches out all of nature, which is, I mean, nature is wonderful, but it's blind, it's unfeeling, it's intractable, it has no responsibility. If I trip over a stone and I get mad at the stone, that's a silly thing to do. But God also made the spirit of man within him. And if you reflect on the spirit that is within you, you gain a great fear of God, a great sense of your purpose and place, different, above, not outside of, but different than the rest of nature around you. So it's reflecting on this kind of sense, reflecting on man being made in the image of God, he says, that defines a proper system of private law. A proper system of private law, of management of the material needs of man, doesn't just feed them, doesn't just breed them, but it elevates the way in which they get the things they want. It elevates them into a higher sense of responsibility. Natural satisfaction through things becomes the material for the free manifestation of personality through the ordering of his life. What he means there is, property law is marvelously made because it says you can eat if you work. You are able to hold on to things that you're responsible for. You are able to develop a household. You're able to develop tools. You are able to develop what you need for your vocation. And if you act irresponsibly, then you'll be held accountable and you'll lose those things. And if you work industriously, you'll be able to keep them because that's right. You'll be able to commit to other people. And if you vary from the will that you commit yourself to, you'll be held accountable because you have a free will that can do. You'll be able to marry, not just for the purposes of the instant satisfaction of lust, but to develop your sexual compatibility with another person into a lifelong commitment, so that mere lust is converted into true faithfulness and the raising of children. Again, just to give you an idea of what he's talking about here. These chickens, they're healthy chickens. And they live in little chicken boxes, and they get antibiotics so they don't get diseases. And they eat. They've got a little eating trough there, and they have little eggs, right? They are managed. And I would not want to live like that. You wouldn't want to live like that. Why not? I mean, you wake up in the morning, and a little conveyor belt is taking away your droppings. And you got your chicken buddy to your right and your chicken buddy to the left. You got food to peck at. You're popping out the eggs. I guess I wouldn't be popping out the eggs, but anyway, you get the point. Why wouldn't you want to live like that? There's no recognition of what you are. There is no recognition of your capacity to take responsibility for yourself. There's no recognition of your freedom. However well the communists or the capitalists arranged a mechanical society so that you were perfectly fed and perfectly healthy, everything in you should rebel against that. Next slide. And it's not just because you're in a cage. You know, these are free-range chickens. And I like free-range chickens. I like organic free-range chickens. Because chickens are wonderful creatures and they make the best choices. They're great creatures. They're out there. They're no longer in a little paddock. They're happier chickens, maybe. Right? but they're still being treated like animals. And if you take me and you say, well, we're going to hide the fact that you're caged, we're going to hide the fact that we're managing your life, but we are not going to have in the administration of public power over you a distinctive recognition of your personality and your identity, I would be a happier chicken like this, I have no doubt. But I would still be a chicken. What Stahl is saying is you can't treat people like chickens. And he doesn't just mean treating them badly, putting them in tiny cages. He means no matter how well you treat the chicken, as long as you're treating him like a chicken, you're not treating him like a human being. That's fine for chickens. Free range them. But that's still not enough for man. It's not enough just to make man ever fatter, ever happier, ever healthier. There's still something that rebels. It is alien to us. It is inappropriate to us. There is something that private law has to do beyond keeping us healthy and breeding. So private law, therefore, springs from a dual principle. It's not enough to keep the chickens healthy. The objective purpose of life relations as grounded in the arrangement of nature, that's keeping the chickens healthy, but also the eternal idea of personality, which on the basis of the former, that is to say, we're thinking, how can I recognize that man is made in the image of God while still creating structures by which he can obtain what he needs? That he can have children, he can eat, he can house himself, he can clothe himself. I must, it is an obligation of respect to God and of respect to man's nature, not simply treat man as an animal technical problem to be fed and housed. I must treat him as one who must be given all those things in a way compatible with respect for his being made in the image of God. So this is our conclusion for today. Private law fulfills man's material needs in a distinctive way by elevating them. Everything that private law does is about fulfilling a material need in a way that pulls the satisfaction of that material need into a recognition of man's capacity to will, to overcome his passions, to overcome his desires, to take responsibility, to form ends and conceptions for himself. Legal institutions of property, contract, and family therefore provide access to and satisfaction of material means, but only by treating man as a responsible agent, with a purpose of defining character, who possesses the capacity for long-term faithfulness and interpersonal unity. Now, I've put that in a way that seems to be obvious, but I want to tell you today, the same radicalism and the same technological spirit is making war on the institutions of private law all over the place. Family law, in the name of radical conceptions of sexual freedom, has basically completely been destroyed. You can no longer enter in the Western countries to a lifelong union where the law says you will be held accountable for the commitment of lifelong fidelity you made to your spouse. Instead, you can walk away from your marriage through no-fault divorce at any time you want with less protection that you would have in a commercial arrangement. We no longer punish adultery. We no longer stigmatize it. We no longer distinguish in any kind of way between various kinds of sexual behavior. We essentially say, in the name of freedom, man must be allowed to rut like animals in the field. And as societies, we encourage people to do it more than animals in the field would be. And the same concepts, we'll talk about this more later in the semester, in the way we manage and understand our property law, in the way that we manage and understand our contract law, we are pushing ideas of responsibility out from them, so that the idea of the morality of promise no longer is central to the obligation of contract, but instead judges talk about things like efficient breach. Instead, people talk about how the aims and ends of contract are solely to be judged by the economic efficiency that they have, that people can hold on to their property only until society decides that there's a more efficient use for that property, and then the government can come in with eminent domain and take that away in the name of efficiency. The basic moral witness that Stahl is going to talk about this semester is being challenged. And so you as Christians, like in Stahl's age, caught between two forms of humanity-denying views of law, have to be the middle. You have to hold this ground. And you as people, you as Christians, who are going to be working in contract and property all of your lives, spending hours and hours and hours in doing this, you need to understand this perspective so that you can give praise to God for it and say, more than what this person wants, who I'm working for, if he's a bad guy. Or I don't know what they want, but I know the system overall that I'm working to maintain, it is pushing the world to understand that they are more than animals. I understand that it is pointing to God in a particular way so that you can give praise to God for it. So at the end of this semester, I hope you have all these dizzying array of elements of private law, but you can instantly analyze them. You can synthesize all of that into its core essence. Private law is a wonderful thing. It is the mechanism by which society sustains the need for material things that people need, but does so only in a way that elevates that by showing people they're made in the image of God and have responsibility, freedom, and the possibility for faithfulness. It's a big task this semester, but it's a big end. The ability to maintain society against these radical oppositions and constantly to be able to give God praise even when you're in the midst of the tiresome work sometimes that private law entails. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we pray for wisdom this semester. As you blessed your servant, Friedrich Stahl, with a great vision of the nature and purpose of private law in relationship to you, our Father in heaven, give us wisdom. We know, Lord, that you have made us, and you haven't made us for our bellies. You haven't made us for our clothes. You haven't made us for any of the things that we can obtain in this life. But you've made us for yourself, Lord. So please, Lord, help us to understand the way in which the law relates to you. And please help us, Lord, in this world that is trying to efface and hide the great truth that you have maintained in history through the law. Please help us to have the wisdom to sustain it and cultivate it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.